morning fog peels off the Guadalquivir, and a wooden hull noses through the mist toward a stone wharf in southern Spain. Sailors shout in 3 languages at once. A clerk in black wool waits on the quay, his ledger already open, his ink already wet, his eyes fixed on the approaching ship. Sealed inside that hold, under orders signed by Hernán Cortés himself, sits a chest of Aztec gold melted into clean rectangular bars for easy passage across the ocean. The clerk does not flinch because he has counted treasure like this before, and he will count more before the year is out. One question hangs in the cold air over that dock, the question nobody yet dares ask aloud, which is how the gold of an entire new world ended up here, 90 kilometers inland, on a single muddy river in Andalusia. Seville is not the obvious choice for any of this. The city sits far from the open Atlantic, reached only by a long winding stretch of the Guadalquivir, and the river itself terminates in a sandbar notorious for wrecking careless captains. Every legal ounce of bullion shipped from the Americas, even so, must pass through this one port. None of that arrangement traces back to geography. The whole system grows out of a single decision taken on the 20th of January 1503, when Queen Isabella I and the Crown of Castile founded the Casa de Contratación, the House of Trade, and granted Seville exclusive rights over all commerce with the Indies. The Casa is something Europe has never quite seen before. Picture a customs house, a royal court, a navigation school, a map office, and a tax authority compressed into a single institution housed inside the Reales Alcázares, the old royal palace beside the cathedral. No Spanish ship may legally sail to the Americas without its blessing, which means every captain has to register, every cargo has to be inspected, and every pilot has to be trained and licensed inside its walls. From 1508 until his death in 1512, the chief navigator there is a Florentine whose name has already been stamped onto 2 continents, Amerigo Vespucci, and it is in Seville that he drills the next generation of pilots who will guide the voyages west. Locked inside one of the Casa's chambers rests the Padrón Real, the master chart of the known world, first drawn up in 1508 and revised every time a ship returns with new information. The map is a state secret. Copies leave the building only in the hands of licensed pilots, every duplicate tracked by signature. The men running this office understand something most monarchs of their age do not, which is that whoever owns the map owns the route, and whoever owns the route owns the gold. Serious quantities of that gold start arriving in the summer of 1519. On the 16th of July, Cortés dispatches a ship from the coast of what he calls New Spain, addressed to the young Habsburg Emperor Charles V. 10 days later, his agents Francisco de Montejo and Alonso Hernández Puertocarrero sail out of Veracruz, carrying letters and the first official remission of treasure from the Aztec world. Cortés has already begun reducing Aztec ornaments to ingots, because raw bars of metal travel more easily than feathered headdresses or ceremonial masks ever could. By the time those ships push up the Guadalquivir, the clerks of the Casa de Contratación stand waiting with their scales calibrated and their ledgers ruled. The rule applied to that gold is brutal and elegant in equal measure. 20% of every precious metal touching Spanish soil belongs to the crown, and that share, the royal fifth, is removed before anything else moves an inch. Other duties climb as high as 40% in wartime, when the navy must convoy the fleets, or drop as low as 10% when the king wants to coax investment back into the colonies. Every coin, every bar, every pearl gets logged in a clerk's hand, and that hand belongs to Seville. What this monopoly does to the city is almost difficult to describe. Roughly 50,000 people live in Seville around 1530, and by the close of the century, the figure climbs to 150,000, 3 times its earlier size. Genoese bankers, Flemish weavers, Portuguese sailors, and merchants from France, Germany, Italy, and England crowd the streets, alongside Morisco craftsmen, African slaves, landless peasants, and rogues from every corner of Spain. By 1565, the city counts 6,327 slaves out of a total population just above 85,000, which works out to roughly 1 in 14 inhabitants. The streets stay loud, dangerous, and astonishingly rich. Seville's daily rhythm becomes the rhythm of the fleet itself. 2 convoys depart every year, one in spring and one in late August, and the return crossing from the Americas takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months. When the lookouts spot incoming sails, the city empties toward the riverbank. Church bells ring across the rooftops, masses of thanksgiving fill the cathedral, and stevedores brace for weeks of unloading, while merchants hold their breath because the loss of a single galleon to storm or pirate can erase a fortune that took years to assemble. Watching over all of it stands the Torre del Oro, the Tower of Gold, raised in 1220 by an Almohad governor named Abu el-Ula, roughly 3 centuries before Columbus crossed the ocean. The structure rises as a 12-sided fortress of mortar, lime, and pressed hay, and the name traces to the golden shimmer those materials throw across the river at sunset. In an earlier life, the tower anchored an iron chain across the Guadalquivir, capable of barring the river to any hostile fleet, until Castilian Admiral Ramon de Bonifaz broke the chain in 1248 during the reconquest of Seville. The chain stays gone by 1520, and yet the tower still watches every hull coming upstream, and every hull coming upstream now carries the wealth of the Indies. What the men on the dock cannot quite see, what almost no one in Seville sees yet, is that the gold barely stops in Spain at all. Once the royal fifth is set aside, much of the remaining bullion flows almost immediately out of the country, north to bankers in Genoa, east to financiers in Germany, paying down the loans, keeping Charles V's wars in Italy and the Low Countries from collapsing under their own weight. Seville functions as a clearinghouse rather than a vault, and the treasure passes through Spanish hands into the ledgers of foreign creditors before the dust has even settled on the wharf. That same gold does something else, something slower and harder to see. Between 1520 and 1650, Spain enters what historians call the price revolution, a long, crippling inflation that averages between 1 and 1.5% a year. By modern standards, the figure sounds gentle. For an early modern economy, it works as a quiet poison, lifting the price of bread, leaving wages behind, and gradually starving soldiers of pay. The very wealth that builds the city begins to corrode the country that owns it. Recent scholarship even argues that American silver was not the only cause, with Central European mining and a rough run of agrarian crises between 1515 and 1526 sharing much of the blame. You can still walk the proof of all this today. The Cathedral of Seville rises a few minutes from the river, and inside it stands what is said to be the largest altarpiece in the world, more than 1,000 carved biblical figures behind sheets of gold leaf, begun in 1482 and finished only in 1564. 82 years of carving and gilding, paid for in no small part by the metal that came up the Guadalquivir. Beside the cathedral climbs the Giralda, originally the minaret of the city's great mosque, an Almohad masterpiece converted into a Christian bell tower. In 1572, the merchants of Seville commission a new building, the Lonja de Mercaderes, to absorb the paperwork their guild has outgrown. Centuries later, that same building is renamed the General Archive of the Indies, and it now holds more than 10 kilometers of shelving stuffed with the records of an empire. The Casa de Contratación itself outlives its golden century, though just barely. The institution moves to Cadiz in 1717, once larger ships can no longer manage the river, and it is finally abolished in 1790. By that point, the plague of 1649 has already wiped out almost half the city, and the fleets of Seville have long since lost their primacy. For one extraordinary stretch in the early 16th century, every legal coin and ingot pulled from a new world had to pass through the same stretch of riverbank, into the same ledgers, under the same royal seal, in the same inland Andalusian port. Stand today on the quay below the Torre del Oro, and the water looks quiet. No chain, no galleons. The clerks with their open ledgers are dust. The stones of the tower remain the same stones that watched the first Aztec gold come up the channel in the summer of 1519, and the archive across the city still holds the handwriting of the men who counted it. The wealth has scattered across 400 years and a dozen countries, and yet the paper trail stays in Seville. The whole story begins, almost all of it, in a single inland river port that for one strange century held the keys to the world. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more episodes from Cobblestone Chronicles.